Raniere found guilty on all charges. V-Week is canceled this year. Attention, once again, V-Week 2019 is canceled. I was thrilled when I got the news that Keith Raniere had been found guilty on all counts after 5 hours of jury deliberation. And let's look at what he was found guilty of. So he was found guilty of racketeering. And under those Racketeering Act, he was found guilty of racketeering 1A, conspiracy to commit identity theft. 1B, conspiracy to unlawfully possess identification document. Racketeering Act 2, sexual exploitation of a child on November 2nd, 2005, and that concerned Camilla, one of the Mexican sisters whose family was involved with NXIVM. Her sister Danny, I described her testimony in another episode. She was contained in a room for 2 years for the crime of liking another man who wasn't Keith Raniere. So racketeering 3, sexual exploitation of a child on November 24th, 2005. That concerned Camilla again. Racketeering 4, possession of child pornography. Racketeering Act 5. 5A, conspiracy to commit identity theft. 5B, identity theft. Identity theft again with 5C, Edgar Bronfman. Racketeering Act 6, conspiracy to alter records for use in an official proceeding. Racketeering Act 7, conspiracy to commit identity theft, and that concerned Mariana, also part of that Mexican family. Racketeering 8A, trafficking for labor and services, Daniela, or Danny, that again, she was the one who was punished for the ethical breach of falling in love with another man, and was basically held prisoner for 2 years in a room. 8B, document servitude. Daniela, they took away all her papers. Racketeering 8-9, extortion. Racketeering Act 10, sex trafficking, and that concerned Nicole, and I'll talk about that in a minute. 10B, forced labor, again concerned Nicole. Racketeering Act 11, conspiracy to commit identity theft. Pamela Kafritz, that was Keith Raniere's great partner who died of cancer, and they used her credit card and fraudulently applied for a credit card under her name and used it, I believe. Act to count 1, they found him racketeering guilty, forced labor guilty, wire fraud conspiracy guilty, sex trafficking conspiracy guilty, and sex trafficking of Nicole guilty, and count 7, attempted sex trafficking. So, you think about a jury and the fact that they came together within less than 5 hours and found him guilty on every count will tell you. And the fact that Keith Raniere himself offered up no defense. And the closing statement was like, and I called it. You can go back to my earlier podcast, and I said the defense will be the defense. Mark Agnefello's defense will be the defense that every crappy person on trial, as lawyer, argues, which is, my client, you may not like my client. He may totally offend you, repel you. He may be a terrible human being, but it's not illegal to be a terrible human being. But guess what? Terrible human beings sometimes do terrible things, and the prosecution certainly proved it in this case. And I wasn't surprised. And we had heard from the press that cults are notoriously hard to prosecute, that this would be a difficult case to prove. Some people were speculating that it was a 50-50 case. It could go either way. Keith Raniere could possibly get off on these charges. I don't know who was writing, who was predicting that. If they had spent any time in court. I think the fact that the other defendants took plea deals will tell you everything you need to know about how strong the evidence was against all of the defendants, not just Keith Raniere. And the fact that Keith Raniere decided to go to trial and declined to take a plea deal, I think was a strategy based on two things. One, it was his incredible narcissism. So he wanted to have 7 weeks where everyone was involved with him. He got to go to trial, and he got to hear all about him. Even if it was negative, I think he got narcissistic supply off of that. Secondly, he felt that he could have the last word with some of his now enemies, former followers that were going to testify. And we saw that with Danny, who was held prisoner in a room for 2 years for the ethical breach of falling in love with another man or being interested in another man. And you saw Keith Raniere wrote endless post-it notes throughout this trial. But during Danny's testimony, he was writing furiously, handing them to his lawyer furiously, and you could see there was an expectation that his line of questioning that he had told his lawyer to pursue was going to bring Danny down. And that was about her petty theft that she may or may not have done when she was a NXIVM follower, back many, many years ago. And he felt that that petty theft that she wrote about when she was writing about how she was going to fix every day when she was in this room prison, she wrote Keith Raniere letters about how she was going to fix this ethical breach. And she had talked about paying TJ Maxx back, and I think it was Walmart, back for whatever she had taken. And she said on the stand she didn't remember it. Now, I don't believe that. I didn't believe her testimony that she didn't remember it. I believe she did remember it. I think it was embarrassing to her. I wish she had just said it. It's such a small thing compared to Keith Raniere stealing 2 years of a woman's life, stealing her self-esteem, stealing her self-worth, and taking her papers. So, among other things. So, when that fell flat, I think that really surprised Keith Raniere. That I think he has no sense of how horrible he is in comparison to others. I think he assumes other people are just as awful as he is. Or can be, let me correct that, or can be made to look as awful as he looks, right? So I think he knows he's a sociopath, narcissist, terrible person. William Ramsey reminded me that he referred to himself as the devil or Satan. I think he knew something, or Lucifer. I think he knew that there was something terribly wrong with his personality, and he did not possess the empathy that others did. And that was also what made this trial so amazing, was he seemed to victimize people with incredible empathy. incredible strengths, personal strengths, and I often wondered while sitting in court if he had targeted these people for their warmth, for their empathy, for their talents, as he possessed none of those things. And I think another reason he wanted to go to trial is he was hoping that he could get out on an appeal, that either during the trial the state would make some kind of minor mistake that would create a mistrial and make a second round more favorable to him, or that the state would make some kind of minor mistake in trial and he could get out on appeal. Now, I think it would be very interesting. We see that a lot when someone gets out for some kind of minor or sometimes more significant violation by the state. The public at large, if you are released from prison, regardless of the reason, the public will assume that that is a vindication, that you have been pronounced innocent and that you have been exonerated. And it would be really interesting. Now, I do not want this to happen. Obviously, I hope that Keith Raniere serves a long, long prison sentence. But should that happen, I wonder if he would go on some kind of PR speaking tour that we see so many people who get out on minor or more significant violations of their right by the state, if he would do this kind of a PR tour. But I was not surprised. And why I was not surprised that he was convicted on all counts. When the last time I was in court in the beginning of June, I saw the first witness was an expert on abusive relationships and coercive control, and she explained coercive control and how it related or could relate to Keith Raniere and NXIVM, and she just explained all the different kind of facets and aspects of it, and I think she was excellent. And she's, of course, connected to New York Hospital, Weill Cornell, Payne Whitney. That's all one kind of conglomerate, which is one of the best hospitals in the country. And all the defense could do was try to sort of look at kind of minor things in her resume, like you are a volunteer, but you're not a paid staff member at Payne Whitney, and kind of things like that. And it's a teaching hospital, Weill Cornell. And it just absolutely fell flat. But we will see more of this. Now, these kind of experts come in and explain really kind of complicated concepts having to do with sexual assault cases, sexual abuse cases, child sexual abuse cases. I think that this is really the time when we will educate juries on this subject matter. So we won't see, for example, a hung jury in like the Bill Cosby case where one of the jurors who hung the jury said, well, the victim, she brought the perpetrator, meaning Bill Cosby, some bubble bath. So perhaps she was giving him signals. I mean, that kind of stuff. Those kind of lame arguments and strange, odd, outdated reasonings will not kind of give a free pass to these victimizers any longer. And the second witness that day was Nicole, who was an aspiring actress whose boyfriend, then ex-boyfriend, had taken NXIVM courses, was really enamored with Keith Raniere, and she was on the witness stand for just a short time before she started describing her understanding of who Keith Raniere was via her boyfriend. And what she said was, Keith Raniere, and I'm paraphrasing, Keith Raniere said he was the smartest man in the world. And it just sounded like a bunch of bullshit. And and at that time, the entire courtroom, there was a little applause, kind of exploded in laughter, a little applause. And my first reaction was to get afraid that someone was going to get kicked out, because Judge Garifas suffers no fools and really is very strict in the courtroom with that kind of stuff. But he was laughing too, and I turned my attention to Keith Raniere, and what I saw was Keith Raniere, a bright red Keith Raniere, kind of gritting his teeth and just not pleased. Really unhappy. Now, the person next to me saw a bright red Keith Raniere smiling, and when I talked to Diane, who's done amazing work reporting this case for the Underground Bunker and the Frank Report, she says she did not see Keith Raniere laughing. He did not look happy to her either, but she did see him turn bright red. So, it's interesting. We were all there seeing the same thing, and two very similar opinions and one kind of different opinion of Keith Raniere's reaction. But I saw also the jury laughing. And why I thought that was so bad for Keith Raniere was that, not that they were laughing at his claim that he was the smartest man in the world. It was the release of hearing such just hearing him talk. We heard a tape where he complained about Danny, that he was really suffering for her being imprisoned in that room. This is a tape that the mother made, begging Keith Raniere to let her daughter out of this room. And he was saying he was really punished because Danny had organized his library, and now he couldn't read anymore because there was no Danny, because she was imprisoned to organize his library, and so he was suffering. I mean, things like that. At that level, and really at the level of just absolute sadism and I don't know what you'd call it, sexual abuse of women. I mean, it just, at that point, I knew that the jury was fully against him. And every time Mark Agnafilo walked over, I had said this before, but it was like a bad smell had entered the room. And I knew that it could not come out any other way, except for kind of like a lightning rod, 1 in 500 million chance that some juror would, I don't know, that a bunch of jurors or one juror would think of some bizarro reason as to why he would be not guilty. I would see a hung jury, but I could not see him getting acquitted of any of those charges. So I thought the chances were possibly very minorly a hung jury, but I really thought he was going to get convicted on all counts, and I thought it would be fast. The Frank Report came out also on June 17th with an article suggesting that Claire Bronfman will be seeing more prison time, that she may be charged with more charges, and I'll just read some of it. And this is from the Frank Report, and if you don't, I'll put the link in either the top of the comments or the video description. Sources say that in addition to FBI agents, senior agents for Homeland Security and the IRS are presently investigating, meaning they're presently investigating Claire Bronfman's role in NXIVM in the Eastern District of New York, with a focus on Bronfman and her role in visa fraud and tax evasion. But this I found more interesting, and the Frank report states that Moira Penza, who really led the prosecution team in convicting all the NXIVM defendants, but Keith Raniere last, will continue on in her role. And he writes, she will also be investigated for more racketeering acts. And being investigated is her perjury in several legal cases to further the gains of NXIVM racketeering enterprises. Among the cases Bronfman is suspected of perjuring herself in are a civil and criminal computer trespassing case. In the criminal case, her perjury led to the indictments that were later dismissed against Joe O'Hara and Tony Natale, longtime NXIVM enemies. In another case, which involves this writer, meaning Frank Parlato, she is suspected of perjuring herself when she went before a grand jury in the Western District of New York in 2011 and falsely swore that she had entered into a certain written contract that she had previously testified in a court case that she never entered into. So, representatives of Homeland Security have been in court every day. Yeah, I've seen them, as well as the IRS and the FBI agents. As per her suspected visa fraud, the pattern is similar to what she did with Sylvie. Bronfman allegedly would file false visa applications claiming that foreign nationals, usually a slender, long-haired, attractive young woman that Keith Raniere would later have sex with, were coming to work for her and her Ethical Science Foundation or the Rainbow Cultural Gardens at a certain salary. Once the woman was approved and came to the U.S., Bronfman would make her work for lower wages, sometimes making the women kick back part of her salary or make her work more hours for free. I mean, so I think that was pretty much, I don't know how you can get better news than Keith Raniere convicted on all charges, but that was fantastic news as well. And I really hope that comes to pass, that she is charged with more charges, Claire Bronfman, because her plea deal was the most demoralizing part and sad part of following this entire case. So, but mostly I'm really happy for out of all of this, especially Keith Raniere being convicted, I'm really happy for his victims. And this episode is dedicated to them. See you back next time.